And to assess the impact of this intervention on jobs and the economy in Nigeria, we're now being joined by Clem Agba, who is Minister of State for Budget and National Planning. Welcome to the program. Now, let's quickly get your take and assessment regarding this report, your initial reactions.
Thank you very much, first and foremost, for having me this afternoon. And I think that in order to react to how successful or unsuccessful the plan has been, it is good for Nigerians to have the perspective of what we went through. You recall that the 2020 budget was approved by Mr. President December 17, 2019. And shortly after implementation started, 1st of January, the pandemic came upon the world. So it first started as a health pandemic, a pandemic that no one really knew the nature of, no one had any knowledge of, and so the whole world was put into a confusion. And at some point, it was stated that in Africa that people are going to be dying on the streets. So this really concerned government, and that is why the Economic Sustainability Committee was set up, headed by His Excellency, the Vice President. The first thing was to ensure how to keep people alive, ensure that we do not have lives lost as had been predicted. Secondly, the supply chains around the world were shut down, and especially our main source of foreign exchange was affected, that is crude oil, because of excess supply in the market. With all the economies shut down, the demand for oil was low. In fact, in April, oil price went as low as US $12 per barrel. That meant a substantial part of the revenues that we were expecting had disappeared. And when economic activities are not going on, of course, companies will not make profit. It also means that the taxes that would come will also disappear. And because earnings will not be made during this period, it meant that states themselves will have serious issues in paying salaries and meeting up with their obligations. Same thing with the federal government. And so when the Presidential Task Force went around the country to visit the federal tertiary institutions, what they saw in terms of infrastructure was appalling. And so the directives that we got from His Excellency, the Vice President, was one, to focus on how to come up with plans and programs that would ensure that we keep people alive. Secondly, because businesses are being shut down, we have to come up with programs to retain jobs and also to create more jobs. And then the state's survival was also very crucial. We had to look for ways and means of keeping the states going, and then also taking care of the various vulnerabilities that we had in the system, and how to ensure that we build resilience in the health sector and ensure some form of food security. So those are the things that we were expected to do. So one of the things that we did was to provide support to the states. First and foremost, the states were having deductions from FAC because of the budget support and the bailout funds that they had received. So one of the programs that was put in place was to suspend those FAC deductions. In addition to that, all the states were given $1 billion naira to support them towards the setting up of isolation centers and other items that are related to the COVID-19. Then also on the health side, we had to take away tariffs from all health-related equipments that were being brought into the country, both equipments. We provided $1 billion naira support to the pharmaceutical industry at this time. All of these were to ensure survival of the states. There was also a program around agric. The low-hanging fruit here was the construction of rural roads. This was to serve two purposes. One is to ensure that food actually gets to the market and prevent post-harvest losses that was taking place. And then the other was to ensure food security, keeping food out there to the people, and also a way of stimulating the economy, because resources were being deployed to that area. On the area of road infrastructure, a lot of roads were rehabilitated across the country, at least 3,707 kilometers of roads, because the focus here was how to keep jobs, how to create more jobs. And the whole idea was to use local resources to do all of this, local materials, bitumen, aggregates, and all of it that is required. And sum of about 60 billion was put into this, also for repairs of bridges across the country. On the rural roads, 495 kilometers of rural roads across 366 communities were constructed. In the health sector, we had to provide funding to NCDC. We had to provide funding to NAFDAC. We had to provide funding to the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development, and then also funding for 52 health institutions. These 52 health institutions were to focus on 4 main areas. These areas were, one, having molecular labs. Because at this time, it was difficult to run some of these tests, and at that time, we only had about 3.5 molecular labs in the country. So with the addition of these 52 molecular labs now that have been built, we now have the capability to do diagnostic for all forms of ailments. No longer do we have to take samples abroad, or one taking a sample from maybe Sokoto, Maiduguri, Lagos, or Port Harcourt to Irua Specialist Hospital just to find out if one had Lassa fever. The other one is, at this time, a lot of people had to be isolated, and we had few isolation facilities across the country. So funding was also provided for these 52 institutions to build isolation labs and also to equip them. And then we had to prepare for the worst by ensuring that intensive care units, at least 10 bedded, were also provided. And because the nature of the illness wasn't really understood, it was critical that the frontline medical personnel were protected. So we made some provision for personal protective equipment. And at some point, additional provision was made to get oxygen across the various hospitals. So in terms of assessing the impact of the sustainability plan, did the states actually survive this period? Were they able to meet up with their obligations? Yes, they did. Were they able to set up isolation centers on their own? Yes, they did, with the funding that they were given. Lagos State had a little more because it was a major epicenter for this disease. When you look at the various hospitals now, the 52, world-class facilities have been set up. I've been going around the country visiting these facilities, also monitoring the reconstruction work that are going on in the roads by FEMA, and also the rural roads that have been done by the Ministry of Agric. Only yesterday, I paid a visit to the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development, and I was really, really very impressed. You know that in the heat of COVID, we were importing hand sanitizers. But this research institute was able to develop the active ingredients for the production of these hand sanitizers. And they had shared this with about 50 manufacturers in the country. And we are now producing these in country and no longer importing them. They have also gotten equipment for sequencing.
Mr. Agba, I can see that, the ESP has been, very busy, and we appreciate that. But I'd like us to focus a bit on the aspect of job creation. Can you tell us about the nature, of the jobs that were created and the actual impact that it had on improving the standard of living of the average Nigerian?
I will speak on the aspect of job creation, but recall that the main objective first was to keep people alive and to ensure some form of food security. In terms of job creation, the program itself created about 2.1 million jobs during the period that is under review from the programs that were set up by the Economic Sustainability Plan. And I would say that itself was very, very impactful. And then when you now begin to add from all other programs that we had in the budget, with the jobs that were created by the states, then therefore it's going to be a lot more than the 2.1 million jobs that were received from the data we collected from the program itself. In my visitation to the various states and the town hall meetings that I had, especially in Kano and in Lagos, some of the recipients, especially in the area of ICT and VSAT installation, spoke about how they have set up WhatsApp groups where they now begin to work together. Some of them are beginning to employ others. They have been trained. Those that have been employed through this other process, I mean the indirect jobs, are not part of these 2.1 million jobs that I have spoken about. So all in all, if we really put it together, I think it's well over the 2.1 million direct jobs from the programs that have been reported.
Right. Okay. So let me ask you, what are possible impediments to a greater number of Nigerians not being able to access the benefits of these programs?
Okay. First, let me put it this way. There was a total stimulus package of about 2.3 trillion. Of this, only 500 billion came from special accounts on the budget. And the other 1.8 trillion was expected to come in through the financial systems based on the negotiations that we had with the Central Bank of Nigeria to have low interest rates, which were at 5%, and also to reduce the conditionalities for the assessment of these loans. In terms of the 500 billion, because the funds were readily available, we really didn't have an issue with that. But the interventions that had to come through the financial systems, that's one area we have had a lot more challenges. But the CBN and the various MDAs are still looking into this and working on how to make it a lot easier for Nigerians. You know that these are not grants that have to be given. They are loans, and the banking system have to ensure that systems are put in place to be able to recoup what have been given out. A lot of people see this as dash, so that's why we've had those challenges.
Mr. Agba, thank you so much for joining us. We are still going to continue this conversation with you. Please hang on with us, and we will be right back after this short break. Stay with us.
Welcome back. You're still watching Newsday right here on the Arise News channel. Before the break, we had a guest, Clem Agba, who is the Minister of State for Budget and National Planning. He's still with us. Good to have you still with us on the program. Let me go ahead and ask you my next question. Before the break, you gave us quite an overview of what the programs are about, and you gave us quite a number of statistics as well in terms of how well the programs are doing. But there are critics who, I wanted to gauge your thoughts, how you would react to critics who would say that those figures do not necessarily reflect reality. How do you respond to that?
You know that there will always be critics when you're driving and you have passengers in the car. The best driver is always the passenger, because he will say you should have done it this way or you should have done it that way. It is not a secret that we went into a recession, and that the recession was short-lived, and that it was only for 2 quarters, and that since then, our GDP performance has improved. It's now on the positive trajectory. It is also not a secret that just before the pandemic and for about 17 months during the pandemic, that inflation rates, both headline inflation and food inflation, was on the upward trajectory. And these so critics did not hesitate not to carry the microphone and talk about this. But with the sustainability plan and the impact on the economy, GDP rates are beginning to improve, and inflation also has been trending down since April 2021. When it is positive news, they don't recognize it. They don't agree with it. It is the same system, the same NBS that comes up with the statistics that are negative, that also comes up with the statistics that are positive. And for government, what we're interested in is the real data, because it is the data that enables us to take the right decisions, or to review the decisions that have been taken when they are not impactful. So I am not surprised that these same critics would speak like this. Maybe they are forgetting how the situation was in early 2020, when nobody understood what was going on, when everybody was afraid, thinking that everyone would die. Even the frontline medical personnel, when they were to come to take your sample, you saw how they dressed up as if they were going to the moon. The situation today is different. They no longer do that. And it is so because of the decisions that have been taken, the programs that have been run, and the protocols that have been set up by government.
And sir, in terms of preparing for the worst, it seems this economic sustainability scheme is quite impressive. But I want to jump to a little bit into the future. We know that the subsidies are going to be removed, and we do know that despite all of these programs, the life for the average Nigerian is a little bit hard still. I'm wondering if such programs are going to be implemented for when that subsidy does get removed, as we know things will hit everyone a little tighter in the pocket.
Yeah, absolutely. There is the National Poverty Reduction with Growth Strategy program that has also been set up by His Excellency the President, and this is being handled, being chaired by His Excellency the Vice President. Some of these programs are being reviewed with a view to improving them and making them more sustainable. And like you know, the ESP was also an intermediate plan. We now have the National Development Plan 2021 to 2025, which also captures a lot of these issues. So definitely going forward, this will be looked at. And I know that His Excellency has even called, His Excellency the Vice President has also called for a meeting of the steering committee for next week. The steering committee for this National Poverty Reduction with Growth Strategy, where we'll be looking a little more at these issues.
Now, Mr. Agba, several states, of the Federation have received, from the Survival Fund, as you earlier noted. But I'm more curious about how these funds are being utilized so that we do not have a repeat of what happened with the COVID-19 palliatives that were hoarded and then looted. What mechanisms have been put in place to ensure that these funds are actually rightly utilized and are not diverted into private pockets?
Okay, the Survivor Fund is actually being handled by the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, not directly by the states. So they are working with the states. The individuals from the states are expected to apply. And like I did say a few minutes ago, that in going around in my town hall meetings, I met a whole lot of participants who knew nobody, but applied through the system just like every other person would. And a lot of recipients all over the country. The only thing that we had noticed, and this was discussed last week when we had the sustainability plan, is that a couple of recipients had multiple programs. Again, so we're trying to bring together the data from the various MDAs. These are people who had a confidence in the system and applied for different programs. We also saw it as a way of saying that there's transparency in what is being done and that there is no interference. Because if one individual is able to get 2 or 3 interventions from 3 different MDAs that were not working together, it means that the system is working. However, we are aggregating the data to ensure that we're able to reach much more Nigerians. The palliatives was a lesson, and so we used a different approach for the Survivor Fund.
Well, I'm glad you actually talk about reaching out to more Nigerians. So as we wrap up on our conversation, what can the government do differently then to sell some of these programs and plans to Nigerians, ever so briefly?
I would even like to put it in a different way, the question that you have asked, to say that Nigerians should show more interest and trust and belief in what is being done. The issue we're having when the Honorable Minister of State for Industry, Trade and Investment made her report last week, we still have a couple of states where we have not had a sizable number of people applying. And we are trying to ensure that there is equity amongst the states, that some states are not benefiting to the disadvantage of others. So the facilities are there. Nigerians should have trust and believe in the system and apply for them, and then they will get them when they qualify, if they qualify.
All right. Thank you so much for joining the program this afternoon, Mr. Clem Agba. It was a great discussion we had, and we hope to have you on the show once more.